Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Subcommittee on Energy and Environment on this very, very important hearing on the future of the grid and the proposals for reforming the national transmission policy. There is no more central issue to resolve here than this question. 3 weeks ago, the Energy and Commerce Committee passed the American Clean Energy and Security Act of 2009. This landmark legislation, on which the House will soon vote, will revolutionize our nation's energy policy, creating millions of clean energy jobs, saving consumers billions of dollars in energy costs, and unleashing trillions in new investment. The 21st century grid will play a central role in this revolution, wheeling the country's vast wind, solar, and geothermal energy resources to market, enabling the electrification of our transportation system, and multiplying energy productivity through smart grid technologies. The Waxman-Markey bill recognizes this role by establishing a new framework to plan the grid of the future. We tasked the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission with establishing national grid planning principles, which it will use to support and coordinate regional planning processes across the country. Within 3 years, the Commission must report back to Congress on the results of this effort, together with recommendations for further congressional action if necessary. Some believe we should go further by substantially expanding Federal authority to plan and site new transmission lines. That includes overriding State decisions to reject proposed lines and using Federal eminent domain authority if necessary. I think we need to look closely and skeptically whether such a step is warranted at this juncture. I urge caution for 3 reasons. First, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. As several of our witnesses emphasize, there are a number of innovative and promising bottom-up planning processes now underway, from New England to the Midwest to the West. We should give those processes time to succeed. Moreover, as Commissioner Azar's testimony emphasizes, one of the greatest obstacles to developing the grid of the future is not a lack of Federal authority, but rather uncertainty as to what energy policy that grid must serve. By establishing a national renewable electricity standard, a firm cap on carbon pollution, and efficiency programs that will dramatically curb growth in electricity demand, the Waxman-Markey bill will provide the certainty needed to guide private, state, and regional development of the transmission system of tomorrow. Second, look before you leap. Transmission is amongst the most complex and controversial aspects of energy policy. Today's hearing is literally the first hearing in this committee, in this Congress, or the last Congress on transmission. We cannot afford to take a ready, fire, aim approach in this area. Further, there appears to be little common ground amongst core stakeholders. To give just one example, we invited the Edison Electric Institute, which represents investor-owned utilities that own most of the nation's transmission system, to testify today. EEI cordially declined, in part because it was unable to agree on a witness that could represent the disparate views of its membership. The testimony before us confirms that it is very tough to find agreement in this area. And third, to a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Precipitous action could result in a policy that is ill-suited to address the problems at hand and could lead to perverse consequences. For example, the Western Governors Association will testify today that, quote, Western governors see little benefit in preempting state transmission line permitting processes because, quote, the major hurdle for permitting transmission in the West has been securing permits from federal agencies. In other words, it is the federal government, not the states, that is the problem from the perspective of the Western governors. Several witnesses in the East emphasized that federal planning or siting authority could actually undermine regional efforts to develop renewable resources and encourage expansion of high carbon generation in the Midwest. We need to take time, take a careful look at this, and see what really makes sense. Today's hearing is an excellent beginning to this process. We have a great lineup of witnesses, and I look forward to their testimony. I would like now to turn to a matter related to the subject of today's hearing, which has been brought to my attention. After I agreed last month to hold an oversight hearing on the subject of electricity transmission and the question of whether to adopt additional new legislation in this area, in addition to the regional transmission planning language that is already in the Waxman-Markey bill, I directed my staff to obtain additional information about two important provisions of the 2005 Energy Policy Act that also dealt with transmission and which are directly relevant to today's hearing. As part of that effort, the subcommittee sent two letters to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. The first letter, dated June 3rd, dealt with the impact of the 2005 bill's incentive rate provisions on the construction of new transmission around the country. That letter was sent out last week. The second letter, dated June 9th, dealt with the impact of the 2005 bill's repeal of the Public Utility Holding Company Act on the construction of new transmission. That letter was sent out Tuesday. Neither of these letters were related in any way to the allocation hearing that the subcommittee held on Tuesday on Mid-American Holding CEO David Sokol's testimony before the subcommittee. They were being drafted prior to our even being aware that Mr. Sokol would be invited by the minority to be a witness at the Tuesday hearing. Both letters were aimed at helping the subcommittee better understand the impact of previously adopted transmission legislation. The PUCA letter contained 8 questions, 2 of which referenced Mr. Sokol's earlier testimony before Congress in support of PUCA repeal. Mr. Sokol was one of the leading proponents of repealing PUCA, which is why his prior testimony was relevant to the issue. However, these questions were in no way seeking to target Mr. Sokol or to intimidate him in any way for his appearance before the subcommittee earlier this week. The day following the release of the PUCA letter, I heard from Representative Barton that minority members of the subcommittee had concerns about the questions relating to Mr. Sokol and the timing of the letter's release. In response to those concerns, I made it clear that there was no attempt or intent to intimidate any witness. In addition, to make it absolutely clear that this was the case, I sent a second letter to FERC clarifying that the FERC should respond to the subcommittee's questions generically and not just look at Mid-Americans specifically. I shared a draft of that letter with Mr. Barton's staff and Mr. Terry's staff on Wednesday night, immediately after they brought this issue to my attention. I responded immediately to their concerns. And finally, I reached out to Mr. Sokol to inform him of what my intent was, to clear up the misunderstanding and to make it absolutely clear that neither he nor his company are the focus of the subcommittee's inquiry. So I want to say to Mr. Barton, to Mr. Upton, and to the members on the other side of the aisle publicly, what I have already said to them privately, that I would never seek to intimidate or retaliate against a person from having to come in and testify before this subcommittee. I value hearing the perspectives that all of our witnesses bring to the issues that we are considering. I regret any misunderstanding or misimpressions that the contents of the letter or its timing may have raised. That is why I immediately, after learning of the minority's concerns, prepared a second letter to the FERC to direct them to respond generically to the questions rather than focusing on Mid-American. That is also why I contacted Mr. Sokol directly to let him know of my intentions and to express my apologies, which I have done. Joe and Fred and the other members, I just want to let you know that I have the personal greatest regard for you, and that in no way do I want to leave any impression at any time that we would conduct hearings that were not fair and open to all of the members of the subcommittee or to the witnesses who appear before this committee. And I just want to make that very clear, very publicly at this hearing. And now turn to recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Upton.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I like many members on this side, do value your friendship. Realize that we're good adversaries on a number of fronts, and we've been together on a number of fronts. And I know, as we have talked about this privately, that it is very important that there is no intention to intimidate or pressure witnesses to testify in something that they perhaps don't believe in. And I, for one, appreciate your statement this morning. I also appreciate you calling for the hearing today on national transmission policy. The electricity grid is of vital importance to our nation. We all know that. However, it is an area that is often overlooked, as evidenced by the fact that there were only minor mention of transmission in the Waxman-Markey climate bill, and that the fact that today, weeks after the climate bill has been passed out of committee, we're having our first really big transmission hearing. We do have a long and distinguished panel today, and I would like to thank all of our witnesses for joining us. I would like to give special recognition to the heads of two Michigan-based companies, Dave Jose and Joe Welch. I know that ITC and CMS do not exactly see eye to eye on this issue, but I know that they have Michigan's interests at heart. And I would hope that we can all work together on this issue as we move forward. This committee passed a sizable renewable electricity mandate without any consideration to the question of getting the renewable electricity to population centers. The strongest winds are concentrated in low population areas. The strongest sun exposure is found in low population areas as well. Existing transmission lines are centered in areas of high population, and there are inadequate high voltage lines to the areas with the most abundant sources of renewable power. If we're going to be serious about renewable power, we have to revamp the grid. And to properly do so, we'll have to block the lawsuits from environmental groups that have increased costs and blocked much needed transmission lines. But let's put it in perspective. According to DOE, it would cost $60 billion, yes, B as in big, in new transmission lines to reach the 20% mark for wind power. Al Gore's lofty goal of fossil fuel electricity would cost perhaps as much as $400 billion in transmission lines. And if we're serious, we must block the lawsuits and make real investments in the needed infrastructure. A good example of these lawsuits is found in California. The proposed Sunrise Power Link in Southern California will connect the region to existing and proposed renewable energy sources, whether they be wind, solar, or geothermal, located east of San Diego. Energy experts estimate that there is perhaps as much as 2,000 megawatts of geothermal power and tens of thousands of megawatts of solar available in the area. However, without new power lines, the clean, green energy could not be delivered to its customers. Studies show that the line will reduce greenhouse gas emissions by as much as 1.3 million tons. Yet various environmental groups like the Sierra Club are fighting it, well documented in publications like the Wall Street Journal. The areas that are best for wind power and solar are often in these very remote areas away from population centers. Transmission lines are needed to get electricity from wind and solar farms to consumers, and I feel it is a mistake to legislate a costly renewable mandate without addressing the transmission issue. With all of that said, we must also recognize that many renewable energy sources are unreliable and can bring instability to the grid. Transmission lines cannot distinguish between the green electrons or the brown ones. So we just can't be planning a transmission system for renewables. We have to take all sources into account: wind, solar, nuclear, hydro, coal, clean coal, everything else. Changes need to be made to the current regulatory system. FERC can provide a backstop, but we must not completely abandon the state and local process. We must also be mindful of the costs. Renewable power is not free. Transmission lines are not free. Consumers deserve to know what the real costs are of any policy and understand exactly what they're going to pay for and what they're getting for their hard-earned money. Consumers are already going to be saddled with increased rate increases, and these costs will only go up under the Waxman-Markey bill. Transmission policy shouldn't add to those burdens. I yield back.
Great. Gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Washington State, Mr. Inslee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks both for holding this hearing and your great work assembling the Waxman-Markey bill. I think that bill is a tremendous mosaic of using multiple tools to solve our energy problems. But it really is missing one critical piece, and that is the piece that will help us spur the development truly of a 21st century national grid. And I think we have to recognize that today, despite the tremendous efforts of people in this field, we have a grid fit for the 19th or 20th century, but not for the new challenges of the new American energy policy. And the way I would categorize that new challenge is that we used to be able to move our energy components around by truck and rail. We could move coal to the site we wanted to generate electricity. We could move natural gas to the site where we wanted to generate electricity or heat. But we cannot ship photons on rail cars, nor can we ship wind by packages by truck. They have to be generated, the electricity has to be generated, in fact, where they are located. Our existing policy on the grid is satisfactory for the first scenario, but not the second. So I have now been at this for some time, hoping to advance our ability to plan, site, and finance the new grid system that's fit for the 21st century. I've introduced H.R. 4059 and had made some progress in the bill and hope to make further progress in hopes to achieve this goal in this energy bill. I want to note several things. Number one, our grid system is doing good work today. I'm not sure you can say the grid is broken, but you can have a horse and buggy system that's working but not fit for today's new world. And we know that it will not be fit for the challenges of tomorrow. So while it may not be broken, it is certainly not fit for what we are now asking it to do. And it's my belief that if we are going to meet our appropriate and necessary 15% renewable energy goal, we will need to allow transmission to move forward. Second, I would point out that the reason we're here today and the reason we need to act today is that this is the only vehicle moving out of town, and it will be the last chance and only chance to really move forward on this effort. And we can't move forward with a renewable electrical standard without a transmission piece. So I think Lincoln's old quote fits: as our case is new, so should we think anew. And thinking anew means federal backstop authority in the event that regional governments are unable to site these necessary facilities. And the reason national backstop authority is necessary is twofold. Number one, our grid has always been designed to respond to local and regional interests. But with the challenges of global warming and national security needs, we now have a national need for a national grid. And second, we know that while all of our constituents love electricity, virtually none of them love electrical lines. And there is a time and a place where Uncle Sam needs to step in to overcome, at times, the reluctance of all of us to bear with some of the onerous aspects of moving electricity. It's simply necessary, and we know we cannot wait decades to move these electrons. So I'm very excited about hearing this testimony. Mr. Chair, thank you, and I hope we can get this job done in this bill. Thank you.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Whitfield. I'm sorry, the chair recognizes, the ranking member of the full committee, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Barton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since we have an oversight hearing on upstairs, it helps me if I could give my statement. I'm going to give a double statement, kind of a bifurcated statement. We'll talk a little bit about this hearing, and then I want to comment on your personal comments, because I think we need to elaborate on that a little bit. But first, on the hearing before us, it's a scary thing when I agree with Jay Inslee. But I do agree with Congressman Inslee. His amendment in the committee on the climate change bill was directed, as I recall, towards green energy or clean energy for transmission. But once you've generated that electricity, whether it's by wind, solar, or even coal power, electricity is electricity, and it's going to go on the same wires, and the wires don't know what the source of the generation was. So we do need to update our transmission grid. We started that process in the Energy Policy Act of 2005, and I thought we had bipartisan support, and it became law. The Fourth Circuit has ruled recently that parts of EPACT are not as they should be. I disagree with that court ruling, and I hope that the Supreme Court will overturn it. But in any event, I agree with Congressman Inslee that we do need to modernize our grid. We do need to give FERC more authority, in my opinion, to make decisions in interstate commerce when the states can't do it themselves. We tried to do that in EPACT, and if that's not the right way to do it, perhaps we can try it a little bit different way. In the Natural Gas Act, we give the right of eminent domain to the FERC. Now, I don't know that we need to go that far for electricity transmission. There is, in all probability, a middle ground where the states and the FERC can work together. But in any event, Mr. Chairman, this is a good hearing, and hopefully out of this will come some consensus on both sides of the aisle about what to do legislatively. Now let me comment on what you said, Mr. Chairman Markey, when you were talking about the letter of June the 9th and the comments towards the CEO of Mid-American, David Sokol. First of all, I'm very appreciative of what you've said, that it was not intended to intimidate Mr. Sokol, and that you've called him and taken steps to make sure that correct what you say is that misunderstanding. To say that publicly means a lot, and I appreciate you doing that. But let me elaborate on why people like myself have expressed concerns. You can't make the best public policy if you don't have witnesses come before this committee and give their full, honest assessment of whatever the issue is that's before this committee. If we adopt a standard that the only witnesses that are going to be received are witnesses that testify to the side of the question that the majority is supporting, you don't really have a full and fair debate on the issue. And in the instance that you alluded to, David Sokol represented a point of view that was contrary to the majority's position on the climate change legislation and the allocation system that's a part of that, the allowance system. That's the side that needs to be presented to the American people. Now, it may be serendipity, and it may be inadvertent, but within 2 hours of him giving that testimony, a letter was sent under your signature to the chairman of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, who's sitting before us today, asking 6 generic questions and 2 specific questions about David Sokol and his company. And the chairman of the FERC was asked to respond in writing to you by close of business yesterday. How can that not be perceived as an attempt to intimidate? Testify in the morning, adverse to the position of the majority. A letter is sent in the afternoon to the chairman of the Regulatory Commission with jurisdiction over your industry and your company. asking probing questions about the conduct and business decisions of your company. Now, I take you at your word when you say that that was not intended and you are beginning to take steps to correct it. But what upsets myself and the others on the minority is that we do not accept that we can develop a mechanism where we allow any member, majority or minority, to threaten, to intimidate, to abuse the power of the office that we're given by the people of our congressional districts on behalf of the people of the United States of America. Now, you're already taking steps to correct the perception that perhaps intimidation was being attempted, and I commend you for that. You're going to get a letter from myself and Mr. Upton and other members on the minority later today asking that we consider those discussions to make sure that we make it absolutely clear that any citizen of this country that comes before this committee can testify to whatever they believe is the truth as they know it without fear of intimidation or retribution. And I think members on both sides of the aisle will share that goal. And if we are absolutely certain that that's the way it's going to be, then nothing else will be said. But again, you and I have been friends for 25 years, and I hope we're going to be friends for another 25 if we both live that long. I have nothing but the utmost personal and professional respect for you and your conduct, and I'm honored to sit on the same committee as you. I've sat in that chair as chairman of this subcommittee, so I think we can get this worked out. But it's a serious issue, and it deserves serious consideration. And to your credit, you're giving it that serious consideration. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman very much, and I thank the gentleman for his words. Chair now turns and recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. McNerney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for holding this hearing. This is a complex and difficult issue. I want to thank the panel for appearing this morning, and in particular the chairman of the FERC. I had the opportunity to visit the FERC this week, and it was a good, worthwhile use of my time. This issue is complex and difficult, as I just said. It's got economic challenges, technical challenges, and political challenges. And I believe the outcome will be best if we do our homework, consider the challenges, and devise a rational and bipartisan plan. So thank you for appearing, and I look forward to your testimony. I hope I can stay most of the time this morning, and with that, I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Whitfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We look forward to this hearing today and welcome the witnesses, and we look forward to their testimony. I just want to make a couple of points. If the advocates for a renewable energy mandate are successful, there's going to be large portions of the Midwest that do not have solar, do not have wind power sufficient to meet their needs. It's going to be extremely difficult for them to meet this 20% renewable mandate without some federal involvement regarding the siting, the financing, the building of additional transmission lines. And particularly when you consider the Department of Energy's 20% wind energy by 2030, saying that they're going to have to build at least 12,000 miles of new transmission lines to meet that need. And then when, on top of that, when you consider this recent Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals decision that Ranking Member Barton mentioned, which does make it more difficult for FERC to operate in this area, I do think we have some significant issues, and I hope this hearing can help us resolve those. And I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Wisconsin, Ms. Baldwin, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Transmission is critical to our nation's electrical system, and I certainly support grid expansion. I have significant concerns, however, about many of the recent federal proposals that jeopardize state and regional efforts to develop the transmission grid. Specifically, these efforts ignore progress and may actually slow investments being made in states like Wisconsin and others in the Midwest. Over the last 7 years, my home state of Wisconsin, the Wisconsin ratepayers have supported more than $2 billion in investments in our transmission system. These actions have and will continue to improve reliability and increase the flow of renewable energy in Wisconsin and our neighboring states. Congress must ensure that we are not undermining the existing processes if we are going to venture into the transmission arena, especially when sensitivities already exist to state authority, cost allocation, safety, and eminent domain issues. As we examine these issues, there are some questions and challenges that we must keep in mind. Who's going to pay for this? Will those not receiving the benefits of transmission have to pay for the cost of lines traversing this country? I'm hearing strong concerns about designing our transmission system for one specific purpose. It's not the job of transmission planners or transmission companies to choose the types of generation that may interconnect with the transmission system. Transmission is needed plain and simple, regardless of the type of generation. And where I come from, transmission is a sensitive subject. It will be very difficult to convince Wisconsinites and other Americans that in the name of national interest, the federal government is taking their property to essentially stretch an extension cord across it to power a larger urban area many, many miles away. So what will this process be like for public input if it is a federally directed process? While the siting of underground transmission lines may be easier than that of above-ground lines, the costs are significantly increased, perhaps as much as $3 million per mile. So mandating technologies on states and regions has significant ramifications. Again, I share the goal of ensuring that critical new investments are made in our transmission system, but we must proceed with caution, not undermining existing efforts that are already working in this process. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Great. The gentlelady's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Pitts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing on our national transmission policy. The official report on the 2003 Northeastern blackout concluded that, quote, as evidenced by the absence of major transmission projects undertaken in North America over the past 10 to 15 years, utilities have found ways to increase the utilization of their existing facilities to meet increasing demands without adding significant high-voltage equipment, end quote. Clearly, there is a significant need for an increase in transmission capacity. This need is amplified as we consider adding more and more renewable energy to the grid. And while I am fully supportive of adding more transmission capacity, I believe we do need to keep in mind the legitimate desires of localities to preserve green spaces and historic sites. My district includes some of the most pristine historic landscapes in the Mid-Atlantic. My district also has some of the most productive farmland in the United States. Chester County, the home of Valley Forge in the Brandywine Valley, where I come from, is one of William Penn's original 3 counties. The tradition of preserving land and being good stewards of the earth have been passed down from generation to generation. We're not against progress, but we want to protect our heritage and be wise about how we use and develop the land we have. Having the needed energy to turn on lights and heat water is critically important to the quality of life to every American. However, the preservation of our historic resources and natural environment of people's communities contributes to our quality of life as well. We need to ensure that all stakeholders are included in deciding where and when transmission lines are sited. Dialogue and compromise are key in this issue. Indeed, it is critical to strike a delicate balance between the crucial electricity needs of the country while at the same time maintaining the historic and open space areas that make our country beautiful and unique. As this committee continues to consider this issue, I hope that we hear from all affected parties and work towards viable solutions. Mr. Chairman, I'm grateful for the opportunity to discuss this issue, and it's my hope that today's hearing is only one in a series of hearings on this issue to ensure a robust and well-rounded approach to our national transmission policy. And I look forward to hearing from our witnesses and yield back.
Great. I thank the gentleman. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Vermont, Mr. Welsh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually want to just get my microphone to work here. I am proud that we have here today as one of our witnesses, David Cohen. David is a member of the Public Service Board in Vermont, serving on his third term, and he's been appointed by Republican and Democratic governors alike. He's done a tremendous job. He's now a vice president of the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners. David is acutely sensitive to the particular needs of rural utilities. We're a small state, but this issue of transmission is incredibly important to us, as it is all around. So I want to welcome him, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for inviting David to be here and add to the testimony. Thank you.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Scalise.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Renewable energies will play an important role in the future of our national energy policy, and I support the development of renewable sources of energy. As a matter of fact, Republicans have drafted legislation, the American Energy Act, which will invest heavily in the development of renewable sources of energy. As we explore the advancement and promotion of energy sources like wind, solar, and hydro, and as the Congress and this administration discuss the future of our national grid and its capacity, we must not neglect that many of these renewable sources of energy are intermittent and need to be backed up by other sources of energy. And we would be remiss if we do not emphasize the importance of diversifying our energy portfolio and ensuring that nuclear power is part of any comprehensive energy policy we discuss. Wind and solar power still need to overcome fundamental obstacles, and we cannot today exclusively rely on these sources of energy alone to power our nation. When the wind stops blowing and the sun stops shining, our hospitals that care for our families and schools that teach our children must continue to have reliable sources of energy that ensure that the life-saving equipment and the lights stay on. Transmission infrastructure, planning, and siting policies are all important to this conversation, as is the regulatory framework that will surround these policies. I believe it is also important for the Congress to carefully weigh regional considerations as we further discuss this issue. Look forward to today's hearing, and I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Butterfield.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to move one seat down so I can have the benefit of this microphone. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for convening this hearing. I particularly want to thank the 5 witnesses who have come forward today to make their testimonies available. It goes without saying, Mr. Chairman, that I support the expanding of the grid using 21st century technology. We certainly must do that. Waxman Markey takes dramatic steps to further the growth of renewable electric generation. The nationwide RES standard demands use of those sources, and the price signal sent from a carbon cap will further the use of clean fuels. As we move forward, Mr. Chairman, we must focus on developing policies that ensure electricity generated from these new sources gets to the load centers that demand them. And this means we must address the deficiencies in our transmission grid that will delay us from reaching our full renewable generation potential or hamper grid efficiency. There are a number of challenges to improving transmission, but siting will be particularly difficult to overcome. Balancing the federal and state and regional and local stakeholder needs and interests will be difficult but critical to the completion of a modernized grid. Comprehensive planning, cost allocation, and ownership will also present challenges, as we have heard today. I applaud the collaborative nature of this subcommittee. Look forward to discussing the issue further. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from California, Ms. Harmon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're debating on the floor a bill to have the FDA regulate tobacco, and I have to say it's a long time in coming, and I'm absolutely thrilled that we will finally, I believe, pass it, and it will become law very soon. So while I'm celebrating about that, I'm thinking about another hard issue, this one, which will require all of us to step up and think about some risky strategies to make certain that the promise of renewable energy and the absolute need for transmission of electricity throughout the country can be accomplished. I think anything we do in this committee will make us a few friends and make us a few enemies. and that applies to us regardless of which party we're in and which region we're from. But I think we have to step up, as many people finally have stepped up in both parties, to the need to regulate tobacco. Just want to point out some of the obstacles. The U.S. electric transmission system encompasses about 167,000 miles of high voltage transmission lines and another 300,000 miles of lower voltage lines. The grid is operated by approximately 130 balancing authorities, which are typically utilities that own transition systems and operate control centers to monitor and control the grid. Those transmission systems are owned by several hundred private and public entities. So let's just start with that. It's incredibly complex, and if we don't get a handle on that and don't step up to the tough decisions, we won't solve the problem. But I would just close by saying that if we really want renewable energy in this country, we really have to fix the grid. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Great. Gentlelady's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I have a full statement I'd like to place into the record. And just a little history, in the 2005 Energy Act, we actually provided for the federal transmission corridors that are so needed. And like my colleagues, some of my colleagues have said, we disagree with the court decision. Hopefully it will be overturned by the Supreme Court. But there are things we can do that may help, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate both Mr. Inslee's legislation and to expand and have a national grid. We know that, and it can't be just limited to renewables, because those electricity protons don't decide what they're going to, where they come from. They just go down those lines. And so that's why I'm happy to be part of the hearing. And again, I'd like my full statement to be placed in the record, and again, support our effort to expand the national grid. I have a huge transmission corridor right behind my neighborhood and I guess in Texas we don't have any problem with pipelines or transmission grids, because our PUC just approved $5 billion for the renewable fuel electricity to come from West Texas to our urban market. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back my time.
Great. Gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Pallone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to first thank you, for all that you've done on this issue. I mean, I know it's been so many years, and we finally passed a bill out of committee, and I know that we'll pass it on the floor and send it to the President eventually. I wanted to point out that Ralph Izzo, Chairman and CEO of the Public Service Enterprise Group, a New Jersey-based energy company, will be testifying on today's second panel. And under Ralph's leadership, PSE&G has been a leader in renewable energy investments throughout the state of New Jersey. Today, the committee will address policy proposals for transmission planning, cost allocation, and siting authority. A strong transmission grid is essential to ensure energy reliability and to move clean, renewable energy from remote locations to population centers. I think we can all agree that planning and investing in a reliable grid is a national priority. That said, we need to be very careful how we craft any new national transmission policy. Two main areas of concern for the Northeast, and specifically for New Jersey, are how to site new transmission lines and how to pay for those new lines. It's critical that states like New Jersey have authority over the siting of new transmission lines that would run through the state. Giving FERC greater authority to site high-voltage electric transmission lines will generate widespread local opposition. Any new transmission legislation must give states adequate authority over siting to ensure that states can protect property, the environment, and cultural and historical sites. Another issue that will affect my state is cost allocation. Specifically, how do we craft legislation that encourages investment in new transmission lines to move renewable energies, such as wind, to population centers? I believe we should think regionally. New Jersey has tremendous potential to meet our renewable energy goals through solar and offshore wind. It does not make sense for New Jersey ratepayers to subsidize the cost of moving wind from the Midwest to the East Coast, a cost of $10 million per mile. This could slow development of alternatives closer to home. I believe the transmission provisions that were passed in the American Clean Energy and Security Act provide a balanced approach that respects regional differences and local concerns. Before we pass comprehensive transmission legislation, we must consider how it will affect the economies of local renewable energy projects and whether it provides adequate siting authority for the states. But again, thank you again, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman very much. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Barrow. The gentleman waives his opening statement. All time for opening statements has been completed.